What's good, everyone? OJ here. Welcome back to another Persona video. It's been a little bit since we've talked about Persona and what could be going on with the Nintendo Switch or other systems and what's going on with that franchise and Atlas, but we're back at it again. And the title is definitely not clickbait or anything like that. I think by the time that you're done watching this video, if you get through all of it, you will see clearly that it's only a matter of time before mainline Persona comes over to Nintendo Switch, or before mainline Persona is no longer an exclusive on the PlayStation platform. So maybe it goes to something outside of Switch, right? Maybe like a Switch 2, right? A Nintendo platform 2. So we'll talk about that. But let's go ahead and get into the reasoning here. Number one, Nintendo Switch is dominating the sales charts. You have to live underneath a rock to not see how much the Nintendo Switch is selling. Not only the regular Switch, but the Switch Lite. There are sellouts worldwide. This system is absolutely dominating the sales charts when it comes to the Japanese sales or when it comes to MPD here in the United States. It's pretty much been the winner every single month for the past year plus, and it's not slowing down. Games like Animal Crossing and other first-party games are going to continue launching and continue boosting the Switch sales numbers up, and that's what you want to see. Any business, any company, they want to see that there is positive momentum. They want to see that there's a lot of people on that system, and in particular, Japanese developers want to see a healthy install base for their games to release. And there's no way Sega and Atlas aren't looking at that and saying, okay, we've got to do something here. Like, the Switch is selling like crazy, games are selling like crazy, and we don't have our games on them. And Japanese RPGs are doing very well on the Nintendo Switch. Like, for example, Fire Emblem Three Houses and Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and plus Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition is going to be a huge game on the Nintendo Switch. Now, the next point that I want to bring up is the engine is already on the Nintendo Switch. So the engine that runs Persona 5, right? That was built off of what they used for Catherine. And guess what game is coming over to Nintendo Switch? Catherine, a game that's not coming to the Xbox One, despite that game originally being on the PS3 and the Xbox 360. We're getting Catherine Full Body Edition. And guess what version of that game was canceled here in the West? The PS Vita version. So they said, you know what? Switch is selling a lot, Vita, not so much. We need to have this game portably as well. Switch is just doing so good, we gotta get it out on there. And they got it out in terms of things, relatively speaking, considering it's Atlas here, not too bad of a turnaround from PlayStation 4 to the Nintendo Switch. So Catherine is coming, there's the Persona 5 engine right there. Plus, Persona 5 Scramble is coming to the Nintendo Switch. And also, whenever they decide to release it, Shin Megami Tensei 5. So there is a number of Atlas games already on the Nintendo Switch or coming to the Nintendo Switch, but the two big ones there are Catherine and Persona 5 Scramble. And Persona 5 Scramble is not really more of a spin-off outside of it's like a sequel to the original Persona 5. So I personally feel that those two games on there, they're obviously eyeing the Nintendo Switch for their big games. Now, next up is pretty much having to do with the next generation of systems. The PlayStation 5 is more expensive when it comes to developing for some of these smaller ones. Now, if you have like the big money, like a lot of these Western companies, I bet developing on PlayStation 5 is going to be no problem. There won't be that big of a difference. But this whole SSD development and what they're implementing with all this different tech, that might be a bit much for some of these second tier studios like a Sega or an Atlas. And the PlayStation 5, it might not take off in Japan. Atlas always likes to have a healthy install base of Japanese owners before they release their games. They want to have that because they're a Japanese company first and they serve that audience first and foremost, because that's why we always see Persona games always launch first in Japan than the rest of the world. There's no telling what the PlayStation 5 sales are going to look like in Japan. It might start off pretty rough because everybody is wanting Switch. And the PS4 got so many big games, from Dragon Quest to Monster Hunter to Final Fantasy 15 and more. And the Switch is just kind of destroying it in sales all across the board. So is Atlas really going to look at that and say, hey, we're going to go with PS5 in the future, only PS5? When you have the Switch that's going to have probably 20 million units in Japan by itself, probably way more than 20 million. By the time that the next Persona game is ready to go, I think you're probably going to want to launch on that big install base. And if you look at it worldwide, the Switch might be at what, 70 million by the end of this year, probably 70 million to 80 million next year, early next year or so. So to me, it's pretty much like a no-brainer that they're going to look at that and say, hey, we can't go all in on PlayStation, considering what's going on with PlayStation in Japan. Now let's talk about this next thing. Sega announced that it didn't quite live up to expectations when it comes to the sales of the game. It was on the charts for a bit and then it just vanished and disappeared. If you had it on multiple platforms, or if you had it to people who haven't already bought the game one time, you probably could have sold a lot more copies. And I think that they're looking at that and saying, this PlayStation only, it's not selling as much as we want it to sell. Not that it didn't sell good enough, but it wasn't where they wanted it to sell with Royale. But if they had a new audience to sell the game to for a huge 100+ hour RPG, they probably could have sold more units. So with that, and with the other things that I've talked about, that's obviously reasons why Sega and Atlas are probably going to change things up in the future. Now the next thing, we're not done here, turn-based, stylized RPGs just don't appeal enough to the broad PlayStation audience. Now on the Nintendo Switch, you have stuff like Pokemon that sells huge numbers, right? You can sell a game like that that's stylized, that's not the best graphics in the world, and that can sell huge numbers. Now I'm not saying Persona is going to reach those numbers if it comes over to Nintendo Switch with mainline Persona, but at the same time, there still is a base that's into catching different monsters or catching different things and using them in attacks and using them in battle, which Persona does, right? And it has that stylized look where you're in school and stuff like that. So that base in terms of who's gonna buy that type of game isn't all just on PlayStation, right? Because if you look at it, in 2017, a game like Horizon Zero Dawn came out, which was lower rated than Persona 5. They both came out in the same year, 2017, and Horizon absolutely crushed Persona in sales. Yet Persona is not a new IP, but the people that play PlayStation the most want to see that action RPG. That's the reason why Final Fantasy VII Remake is an action RPG. They want to appeal more to the Western audience. That's why the graphics are as good as they are. That's the type of people who buy PlayStation, who buy a lot of games. So that's where the big sales are on PlayStation, are those type of games, that type of graphics. Otherwise, Persona 5 with its 93 average and Persona 5 Royale with its 96 average, 95, 96 average on Metacritic, those games would have sold way better on PlayStation. Those should be 10 million plus unit sellers, considering the PlayStation 4 is at 100 million units worldwide plus. That should be a 10 million unit seller based on how good the game is by itself there, because those are very good review scores. That's as high, if not higher, than many Nintendo first party IP. So the fact that Persona 5 Royale isn't absolutely dominating the sales charts across the board, despite it being an extremely good game, there being a ton of PlayStation 4 users that don't have the game, it having a 96 average, it just shows that there are more of a base that's not necessarily looking to play that type of game on PlayStation. Otherwise, it would have sold way better considering the install base of the PlayStation 4. Now, next up, and this is probably one of the more interesting things here, guys, is that it's Sony's strategy. You look at the new management, Jim Ryan, what they're doing there, Sony moving the headquarters from Japan over to the States and everything. It just doesn't seem like they're as invested in Japan. And if you look at their own Japan studio, they haven't made a hit in a long time. Now, there's been some games that people like, but there aren't any explosive games with the big sales that Sony wants to see from their first party games, like The Last of Us and like Horizon Zero Dawn or like Spider-Man, for example. All of the Japanese style games like Gravity Rush and like The Last Guardian and Shadow of the Colossus, none of those games ever reach anywhere near the levels of what we see from their other more Western style focused action RPGs and everything. Not only can I see that, but Sony sees it, the rest of the industry sees it. They're definitely moving towards more of that style of game in terms of what they want to do with their IP, and of course what they think sells and gets them big royalties and numbers. Will they be willing to go in with the PS5 and exclusivity with Persona, considering what's happening and how they're changing their business model and structure? I don't really think so. And I think that there isn't any solid clad evidence that there is some type of big money bag that Sony is paying them to forever keep Persona Mainline exclusive to PlayStation. And if there was, I don't think it's going to make it over to the PlayStation 5. I don't think there's enough clout at this point. Back when Persona 5 was coming out, the Wii U was obviously in a very bad situation. The 3DS obviously not powerful enough for what you want to do. The Wii U was in a bad situation. It makes sense. PlayStation was doing fantastic. It made perfect sense to go with PS4. Xbox obviously wasn't in the conversation. They were doing bad as well, and no Japanese in terms of sales, no Japanese sales at all. So it makes sense. But in this business climate, with what's going on with Sony and how they're adjusting things, and what's going on with the Nintendo Switch, and how people are buying RPGs and buying Japanese style games a lot on the system, it doesn't make sense to take that same route that they took before, unless they're getting some type of massive, huge money bag that I don't think Sony's gonna wanna pay going forward, because they wanna give that to Call of Duty to get exclusive Modern Warfare for a month. They wanna give that to Destiny and stuff like that, like they've been doing all throughout this generation with the big exclusives and DLCs and certain things that they've been getting here and there from third-party companies. So if you look at all of that reasoning, I think it's pretty clear that there's only one solution, or there's only one thing to kind of point to, and that the time is limited when it comes to mainline Persona being exclusive to PlayStation. And I think it's only a matter of time before it does finally make its way over to Nintendo Switch, considering everything that we talked about here. But what are you guys' thoughts? Let me know in the comment section below. All right, guys, that wraps it up for this video here. Check out the link in the description. We've got Twitter. Go and give us a follow on there. Stay up to date on all the latest gaming news and information. Also, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and share the video if you can. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll catch you for the next one. Peace.